So the first thing I'll say about trauma, it never goes away completely. I know we like to say we've healed trauma. I view it more as we grow in our awareness around it so it doesn't trigger us for as long as it used to. We can move through that trigger more steadily because of the tools we have in our toolbox.
Welcome everyone to the Frontline Warriors Club, where we live it, not in it. Join us on this mission as we raise consciousness. You can find us on wearefrontlinewarriors.com. Now before the show, let's take a moment to inhale. Exhale. And let the show begin.
In this episode, we would like to introduce you to Dr. Nicole Garritano. Nicole is a nurse practitioner and professor turned intuitive developmental facilitator and consultant using human design, subconscious transformation techniques, and healing modalities to help others step into their full potential. She blends her love for science with her curiosity of the mystical to help others understand the mysteries of life. You can also find her on her podcast, The Woo is True. We talk about how trauma presents itself in physical ways, how to identify your trauma, and how to heal that trauma. Thank you so much for your time, Nicole. Thank you for being here. Can you give us a little bit of a background about yourself?
Oh, yes. Well, thank you. We've connected in the past. It's great to see both of you again. And so I like to call myself a recovering healthcare professional and academic, although I still use all of those qualities in the work that I do now. So now I really work as an intuitive development facilitator and energy coach, primarily for women. But I was just saying earlier, I have occasionally men that come in, but really it's about this wanting to know our deeper purpose and really understanding our energy better and how that impacts how we show up in our day-to-day lives.
Why is that so important? Why is it so important to figure out your energy and how it impacts you in your day-to-day?
Yes. So we're all, I like to think about it. If you think about all these individual light bulbs, you know what I mean? So each of us are like our own unique light bulb or energy center. And so you could, if I were a literal light bulb, right, you could try me in one lamp and I might light up perfectly. And you could try me in another lamp, and if I don't match up just right, I'm never going to light up. And so we're walking around each day with really a unique set of like energy wiring that we're hardwired. And I truly believe we're hardwired for this before we're even born. However, if we're not plugging in to the right people, the right circumstances, the right environments, we can never shine. We can never show up with our true energy and make the true impact that we're here to make in the world. So when you can understand how you're hardwired a little bit better, you can actually leverage that to your advantage. And then you also start to grow in your understanding that the other people you're interacting with on a daily basis are also uniquely hardwired in their own way. And so it does create like a level of understanding and compassion that we may not normally have when we're very ego driven and just focused on our own circuitry, so to speak.
And how did you get started into this? Was there a time where you noticed that like, hey, this energy, it's something that's maybe more impactful than we might have thought? How did you begin all this, and when did you first experience this like feeling of that energy exists and it gets passed down from people to people?
Yeah, so for me, when I go back now, I was really sensitive to it as a child. I didn't appreciate it for that. And then as I went through like different stages of my career, I would say it was most impactful when you go to a meeting or you're sitting in a group and they're having like a committee meeting or staff meeting. I would be in those and I could like read everybody at the table. It was like I knew what they were thinking before they'd even say it. And for a while, I truly did, especially like in my early 20s to mid 20s in those environments, I would think, oh, well, everybody can do this. So I really don't understand why people can't figure this out. Like, why are we arguing about this? But then as I got a little older and a little wiser, I was like, oh, wait, I think I interpret this different, you know what I mean, than other people. And so I could always read body language really well. But then it kind of got to the point where I would be in a meeting and I could just kind of feel like they seem really sad or distracted about something else, or they seem like really happy, or you can tell like they're not giving anybody else a chance to talk because they just think their idea is the best. And so I feel like it's things we all pick up on. It was just a little more fine-tuned for me. And so I also found it, in my healthcare role, I was always in pediatrics. I would have dreams about my patients. Things would happen to them that happened in the dreams. So I just had like this energetic connection, and that made me really curious. So then I started like reading books, doing some classes on my own, off to the side, and then just really understanding this idea of our energetic systems within our bodies.
And you mentioned that these systems are hardwired, so we are all this beautiful light orb of energy. How does trauma come
Yes.
into place? How does trauma like deplete this and diminish this light?
Yeah, so what I'll do, I'll just use a really simple example for the listeners. So I think most of us are familiar with the chakra energy centers in our body. So there's lots of other energy centers that are discussed, in the literature and out there when you go to research it. However, if we think about those chakras, right, those 7 centers that run through the core of our body, we're pretty familiar with. They need to spin in this direction if you go and do a little research on them. So we want them to be spinning in a clockwise direction. They emanate a certain color or shade of light, right? Which we have then the whole rainbow of light running through the core of our being. What happens with trauma is that those energy centers, those chakras, are actually supposed to take light in from the outside. So whatever higher power, you believe in, that we have this connection to something greater than us, we're absorbing light in that way from the cosmos, if you want to call it that, or from the environment around us. And when we're absorbing it correctly and have that true connection, everything is spinning, right, in that clockwise motion. It's important to note too, we bring this energy in on all sides of our bodies because we're multidimensional. Many times we don't think about the backside of our body and how there is actually light flowing in and out, and that chakra does point out the back as well, not just the front. It's always oriented to the front of our body. But if people are listening, I want you to start thinking of yourself as more of that multi-dimensional being. When trauma comes in, it throws off the way the light is spinning. It throws off, will literally block sometimes that greater source light from coming in, because our body, our subconscious, wants to go into that fight or flight and shut down right then in the moment. And so without even realizing it, many times when we've experienced a trauma, we've shut down different parts of our body. And when we think about the chakras, we receive in specific ways through those specific chakras. So you could have one impacted, you could have multiple energy centers impacted, but that's technically what happens. And so sometimes we'll feel like we've dealt with a trauma. Well, I went and I talked to somebody about it. I talked about the triggering thing. But if we don't get to the root of where the trauma actually originated from, it's just like putting a Band-Aid, on something that's really never going to heal. Eventually the Band-Aid peels back, the wound's still there, and something else triggers or, infects the wound further.
And if this is going unconscious for somebody for a long time, I know that disease starts to become physical and starts stagnating because that's what energy does. So can you touch about how this trauma correlates into physical disease?
Yeah, so you're exactly correct. The longer we go without addressing the trauma, it will eventually manifest as physical dis-ease in our body. So I would say almost all of my clients that come to me with some type of physical manifestation of disease, once we do the work and we get to the root, we can go back to an experience that happened in childhood or a familial pattern, of this disease process. And that's the other really fascinating thing, is that we can carry our lineage trauma within our DNA. And so things can manifest within us and within our physical body that's never been dealt with by those generations that came before us. So while maybe there were multiple generations that dealt with anxiety, we happen to be the one, because it's never been dealt with, that now we manifest it as ulcers, in our stomach lining. We have the GERD, and we're like, I don't get it. I may not suffer from tons of anxiety myself. So where is this coming from? And so part of the work I do with my clients is we really get to the root of that. But it's very much taking all these different pieces, right? You're putting together a storyline, so to speak, and it's actually your inherited storyline many times.
And you mentioned getting to the root of it and helping people figure out the root cause of this. So is there specific questions you ask? How do you get to that root? Do you
Yes.
have like a specific question that you ask your clients, or is it more of like where you sit down and meditate? What's the whole, how does the process look like to get in that? For example, for somebody that wants to maybe start digging into it and exploring this before they want to take on a session, how can they start to explore the root cause of their issues just by themselves?
Yes. So I tell all of my clients, and anytime I'm in these types of environments speaking, you can do the 5 whys, which many of us are familiar with. So, just as an example, if it was the anxiety, like, why am I feeling anxious? And you just want to go with the first thing that comes up for you. It's not this deep analysis. And, we're dealing with healthcare workers. We are really taught, we are conditioned to be very analytical, right? And to observe this and look at this. And we are doing part of that. But for this exercise of the 5 whys, you're truly just, what's my gut telling me? What is the first answer that comes up for me? And you ask yourself why 5 times till you get to the fifth why. And typically then on your own, you can be at the root of where this is coming from, where this feeling's coming from, where maybe this disease in your body is coming from. But you have to do it pretty rapid fire in order to get there. And so what happens is you get there and then you're like, but now what do I do with it? Because I don't know maybe what to do with it on my own. What I do, my process, since you kind of asked that too, for me, it is very much intuitive, which I love because nurses, we have a lot of intuition. All of us have intuition, but that particular career, nurses do rely on their intuition. They create that energetic bond with their patients, right? And so you can walk into a room and be like, something's off. The monitor looks great. All the technology's telling me my patient's okay, but you still have that gut feeling, right? Just some unease in your body about that person. So I use a lot of that with my clients. I will sit with them. I'll ask questions and be a really good listener, right? Like we are in our healthcare roles. And then from there, I'm able to energetically tap in myself and I'll get a feeling. A lot of times because of my healthcare background, I'll be brought to like one organ in their body, or I will see, or maybe something's stagnant, there's stagnant energy around that organ. Then I'll ask some more questions. A lot of what I do works very complementary with traditional medicine because many times people I'm working with, they've already seen all the traditional physicians, right? They've gone to the specialist, they've done this, and they still have conflicting answers on what's wrong with them. So sometimes, although they're completely frustrated, I actually love that because we've already checked all these boxes, right, from traditional medicine. So I know, we can go a lot deeper, a lot more quickly because you're not going to have this urge to go back and get this other test done or have this other thing done because you've already done all of that and you're not getting the answers that you want. So for me, it is a very intuitive process and understanding those energy centers and being able to get the feeling from the client I'm working with around those energy centers.
And so you mentioned organs as well, which is fascinating. So do you believe that energy is stagnating in specific parts of your body, like organ systems, where you're isolating that? And are you just isolating it based on the symptoms that the person is talking about? And then we dive deeper into that?
Yes. So what I tend to find, different organs in the body will definitely correlate to specific patterns of disease, you know what I mean, in the physical feelings that they're having. A really easy example that I think most of us would understand is that idea of like the broken heart. They're having heart issues, or maybe they've had heart palpitations, they may have a family history of heart attack or stroke or something to that effect. But in and of themselves, they've been pretty healthy. The testing's not showing much other than they're having these palpitations. They've tried hydration, you know what I mean? They've tried maybe adding certain things into their diet, trying some different supplements, but they're still really frustrated because heart palpitations can be really scary, right? That sense of losing your breath, not being able to breathe properly, and then the racing heartbeat. So a lot of times when we go in, I can go in, and it's a bit of a meditative process that I do when I'm like going in to kind of analyze that energy or assess it for myself. But usually with the questions and what I see and what's coming through, I will very specifically see like a pattern of heartbreak, and maybe just not for the person I'm working with, but patterns of heartbreak in their family. So maybe family members passing, maybe loss of job, right? Loss of friendships, loss of like maybe status that's come up before, like this having a certain status in your community, which would have been really important You know what I mean? Many, many generations ago. And now it's coming forward. And sometimes the people I'm working with are experiencing it as like loss of status, maybe at a job, right? Or maybe within a community that they take part in. You know what I mean? They're feeling like, oh, I used to have this role in that. And now I've been pushed down to this role. But that's like a number one, that heart connection where the heart can be broken, and we'll see it manifest in these different ways. So chest pain, heart palpitations, things of that nature.
And looking back to those people that had maybe childhood trauma or something that affected them in a childhood that lingers now or carries over, does that manifest in a specific way, or does that also vary between individuals?
That really varies between individuals. So what I'll say is that a lot of times our childhood trauma, we have repressed it in some way, or we were told growing up, like, oh, that wasn't a big deal. You're fine. You're over it. You know, maybe within the family, even it was something that was pushed under the rug. Nobody talked about it anymore. So many times, things that have happened in childhood, we may not even be able to appreciate it in our adult mind and our adult body. However, what happens is you see, you know, you may see something that triggers a repressed memory for you, or certain things happen and you're in certain environments and you get that fight or flight response, like, I just need to get out of here, right? Or I'm feeling like really agitated right now. And many times we won't know why that's happening. We'll try to place it, right? Our human brain very much wants to know, like, why am I not enjoying this? And we may come up with like a sliver of it. Sometimes people have the full on remembrance of something when they're in that situation, which is like re-traumatizing yourself all over again, because you're remembering something that your subconscious has tried to repress for a while. But we'll get those little tiny triggers is what I typically see happen with people, until finally all those triggers happen. And then they're like, oh, wait, I know what this is about. This thing happened when I was a kid. I really thought I was over it, but I'm not over it, right? Or they'll have it around childhood and they're like, and my parents never believed me, you know, and now it's bringing up, you know, all this either dis-ease or unease in my body, and I really need to work on it. And so the path to working on it can look quite different for each person, but that's the pattern that I'm typically seeing when they show up to work with me.
Yeah, a good example comes to mind, I'm sure you can relate, Matt, is so Matt and I grew up in a Polish household. And for example, every time we would go to church on Sundays, parents always say, you gotta dress nice, you gotta act appropriately because what are people gonna think of you? Every time you go to like a party as a little kid, you gotta dress nice and act nice because what are people gonna think of you? And it's almost like as a kid, you're programmed to be validated externally by others. And that kind of trickled down into my teenage years and growing up. And I realized that I was judging myself based on other people's opinions versus my own opinion. It's almost like I valued what other people think of me more than what I value myself. And I learned that growing up as a kid because my parents always said, hey, you gotta dress like this, act like this, because what are people gonna think? And that was always lingering on for still a long time. And I couldn't realize why. And then when you look back, you get to the bottom of it, you're just like, well, this makes sense why I'm this way. Because when I was growing up and I was a kid and I wasn't sure how to tackle life or how should I think about life or what is life, my parents told me that a part of life is the way people view you, and you have to do things a certain way to almost please others. And pleasing yourself was almost put on a back burner because you had to show up and you're showing up for other people. And I'm sure you could relate to something like that as well, right?
100%.
Yeah. And just going back, and it could be something so small like that, like your parents just telling you, dress nice, act appropriately, and that transfers that deeply inside of you. Where now, like in your 20s, you're in college, and you're just valuing yourself based on other people, and then you have to unlearn that, like you mentioned a lot, Matt, unprogramming or
unlearn to relearn,
or unfucking yourself, because our parents want the best of us, and they understand that they're adults and it matters how people look at you, but as a child, it's not as important as a child as it is for them. But the fact that they put it on you at your early age, you learn to put value in that because your parents are right. So if they're telling me to do this and dress like this, and they know more than me because they're older, they're my superiors, they're wiser, then this is how life is. But it's really not.
What I'm fascinated about is what happens after that is you start projecting onto people, right? So that you're in the room and you keep trying to get a validation from me externally, right? Because of this program. how do you snap out of it, Nicole, which is fascinating, and be like, hey, I'm projecting onto my relationship, my partner, I'm projecting onto the pastor in this case, or I need to like present myself. How can you like
Yeah,
differentiate the difference between it? Because that blends reality so much.
it does. It's all about awareness. So just what each of you are pointing out, you're able to recall something that happened, but now you see it through a new lens. So we can go through and like analyze different situations in our lives. I will say on the parent one, most of our parents conditioned us the way they were conditioned. So we're just repeating a pattern, right? Until we decide to be the pattern breaker because we've grown in our awareness enough and we've decided to look outside of that maybe familial box, right, that we grew up in, and we've expanded our horizons. So now we can flip the switch, we can see it in a new way. I always say it starts number one with the awareness. But I love what you brought up about, our parents condition us this way. They're authority figures, they're this, they're that. We carry that right over into our healthcare careers, right? We let systems then condition us. And right now we're letting a very broken system condition us. Some of us are, some of us aren't, right? But that's one of the like big heartbreaks for me in healthcare right now, is that we're letting broken systems continue to condition new nurses coming into those systems, established nurses that have never really known any different. And we do see an uprising, right? There's an uprising now that we haven't seen before. So we know some of the conditioning is starting to change, but I feel like it's really important for listeners to understand, yes, this conditioning starts when we're children, but then we're conditioned to be conditioned over and over and over again. So there's all these facets of our life where we can grow in that awareness and say, wait, when I grow in awareness, I always say to myself, wait, is this of me or is this of someone else? So like the parent example is great. I need to look nice to go to this place. Is this because I really feel like I need to look nice? It's going to make me feel better looking nice. It's going to like show respect, or I'm going to feel good about myself dressing up. Or is this because I have that little old voice in my ear from when I was a kid, like, you better dress nice, this is one of those events where you do that. Right there, I just grew in awareness, and I can pick out what's a conditioning versus what is something I truly desire for myself.
And you just mentioned healthcare workers. So how does that trauma, everything that we piled up into our emotional baggage, how does that translate into healthcare for the nurses?
Yes. Yeah, so I like to use this analogy. When we start a job or we start a new career, or even if we're established in it, right, we're all carrying around our backpacks. Okay, so when we start out as a brand new nurse, we have a couple tools and tricks and things in that backpack, right, for our career. However, there's like a secret pocket on that backpack, and it has all of our life experience. It's like that little zippered side where you don't always put things because sometimes it gets lost in there, but it's supposed to be like that extra little compartment. We all have that on our backpack. And so we come into any role, any situation in life, but particularly our careers, we have that whole life experience in that secret little pocket. So we go about our business and we like follow the algorithms and do the protocol and show up on time and go to all the meetings and do all the things we're supposed to be doing. However, when we're doing each of those things we're taught to do at work, we have all these influences in that little secret compartment that are informing our experience of that. So we could be sitting in a meeting that we're required to go to, and for some people it's like, oh good, we have that meeting today. It's like built into my day, kind of becomes a mini break because I'm not with my patients right then. I'm just taking in this information. We get to sit, they probably brought some snacks, you know what I mean? All the things that they do to try to entice you to want to be at the meeting. However, maybe the topic they're talking about or the person running the meeting, you know what I mean? Maybe that person has a certain authority that really triggers you. And maybe it triggers you because it's like the way your mom always talked to you. And you and your mom don't have a great relationship, now. So every time you have to go to this meeting, whether you realize it or not, you may not appreciate it on that level, or you may not have grown in your awareness, but you're so triggered by this meeting. It has nothing to do with your actual like role with taking care of your patients, but it's that this particular person really triggers a past trauma in you, or your mom talked down to you, or you have this broken relationship, with your mom, and you can't wait to get out of that meeting. Same thing can happen when we're in a patient room. There could be multiple family members in there and you're just overhearing what they're talking about. That could trigger something for you that's happened in your own family, some dialogue they're having, maybe some term or some word that they're using. That little secret compartment just gets triggered, right? Like you can't help it. And many times we're so focused on the task at hand, especially in nursing, like we have to stay on schedule. We have to do these things, on this certain time frame, that we're picking up on it in our periphery, like that peripheral energy swirling around us, and it's slowly getting sucked in. And so it's like impacting you. Sometimes you don't notice it till you're driving home. Sometimes when you finally get that break, if you actually get to run to the bathroom, right? When those moments alone, you're like, oh, something's not sitting right with me. I feel so triggered. I feel really upset. So we can have that happening with the trauma that we bring in. We can also have brand new traumas occur on the job. And I think we saw it before COVID, but we have lots of evidence now of the trauma that occurs on the job.
That's a really good perspective on things. And also with how busy healthcare is and everything going on, let's just say somebody does trigger you or something comes up from the past and our body feels tense or rigid, or we lose patience with our patients. It's really hard to tell that, hey, this is a trauma response. Hey, this is a need that I need to give myself. It's always about, well, John Doe over there needs a pain med, so I need to go. And now you're wasting my time. So in a sense, and you get triggered by this patient, you kind of maybe use bad language towards him, not in the verbal sense, but maybe dismissing his needs or his emotional needs, whatever, because you're trying to go somewhere. So I do see how that plays a role, but in the grand scheme of things, healthcare is probably a bad way to start picking up on your trauma points of how to heal, because there's just so much going on in that aspect.
There is. No, there really is. And it does impact patient care, for sure, without the healthcare provider actually meaning for it to happen in that way. I think that's a really good thing just to point out, that I feel like 9 out of 10 times, most people walking in the door for their shift are like, okay, I'm going to try and make it the best day possible, even if other things have been stressful for the most part, right? It's a fresh day, new, not always, right? But for the most part. However, once you get in there, it doesn't really take too long for things to spiral out of control if you haven't been able to process your own trauma. And I feel like the other thing that happens a lot is your idea of a trauma and my idea of a trauma are two different things, right? So even when we try to share this sometimes in what we feel like are safe environments, we think healthcare sometimes could be the safe environment for us to share how we're feeling, but we'll just get dismissed by our colleagues because they didn't have our same lived experience. And so like even in the trauma world, we have like what we call little T traumas and big T traumas. Big T traumas tend to be the things that we all think of as really big traumas, but there's lots of little T traumas that happen to each of us. And maybe your experience of it was different than my experience. So maybe it never became a little T trauma for me, but it did for you. And me dismissing you creates then another trauma for you, another little T trauma, because nobody wants to hear you or witness you in that moment. And you can see that where that can happen with our patients too, where we have a hard time maybe witnessing what they view as traumatic because we've seen so much in healthcare that we're like, this person over here thinks they have this going on, and we'll dismiss them, right? So it can work both ways.
Yeah. And that being said, is there ways that maybe, let's just say I see Matt struggling with something. Maybe he's got a big T, and to me that big T is a little T. How can I help him maybe open up a little bit, or how can I help him push through that trauma without having him maybe seek like a therapist, or just as a friend, I want to genuinely help him. How can I get him started in that, or how can I help him through that process?
Yes. So really easy things to do are, number one, just say, I'm witnessing you in that. I don't have that same experience, but you know what? I'm witnessing. And if you just need to vent right now, just vent to me. That's always a good place to start. Number one, you're acknowledging what the person's going through, what they're trying to share with you. Number two, you're opening up to venting. Sometimes people just want to vent. They don't necessarily want the coaching, right, or the advice. And especially as healthcare providers, we're pretty naturally inclined to, I'm going to help you. I'm going to fix this for you. I'm going to solve this problem. So right there in and of itself, the witnessing, do you want to vent or do you want advice? Giving them a choice. Many times we don't give anybody choices. We're just like, oh, they need this, I'm going to go provide it. But he still has free will in that situation. So as a good friend, you're giving them an option. And then from there, there's different techniques you can do. So I love breathing techniques just for people to go to help calm the nervous system and try to re-regulate right there in the moment. It depends how triggered he is, but a good box breath, you know what I mean? Just single nostril breathing where you take turns out one side of the nose, out of the other. Those can be really simple things that you can do. You can advise someone to do. They can go do on their own. We can do this at work, right? We can go stand in a corner and breathe on our own, and we don't need a lot of privacy to do that. It's the awareness and getting intentional with the breath. So we want something that slowly brings the central nervous system back down and helps regulate it, because you can't just go from 0 to 10 or 10 to 0. That doesn't work well with our central nervous system. So those would be some really basic tips that you could do. The other thing is sometimes we're in our head about what's going on. Our body's feeling all these things, but we're really in our head. How do we drop out of our head and back into our body? Like, how do we calm the racing thoughts? The breath helps with that, but while you're breathing, like focusing on a part of your body and letting your mind kind of decompress at the same time is super important.
Yeah, that's a good point, because when people are triggered, they're really emotionally, you can say, dialed in, a little too dialed in. And the best way to get them out of the head and get rid of those emotions is just have them not focus on that for a minute. And like you said, the best thing to do is have them breathe, because if you're not constantly thinking about that trigger and you're focusing on your breath, guess what? Your emotions are slowly starting to get regulated, because you're not being triggered. You're more breathing and you're more relaxed, and your mind isn't fully on that. And so let's just say someone's now very self-aware. They know that this trauma is stemming from childhood, but how can they now change the course of actions moving forward? Is it the way they think about that feeling that they had as a child? Do they change the action that they do? Do they start going to the gym more? If you identify a problem, how do you now change that to not be a problem?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say about trauma, it never goes away completely. I know we like to say we've healed trauma. I view it more as we grow in our awareness around it, so it doesn't trigger us for as long as it used to. We can move through that trigger more steadily because of the tools we have in our toolbox. Okay, it's not to say that that old big T trauma won't come back in 10 or 20 years because something else happens, and it like rears its ugly head at you again. But hopefully in that amount of time, you're like, oh no, wait, I know I go to this, and this to work on it. So it's not that we ever totally get rid of it. I think that's just important for listeners to know, because that's the reality of the world that we live in. We don't know sometimes when these things will come circling back. We can't predict every experience, right, we're going to have in the future. So what I would say is that depending on the trauma, I'm going to give you an example that I learned from one of my teachers that I think is really applicable to a lot of situations. It's really about thinking about your boundaries, right, in a new way. So one of my teachers likes to talk about how we each have a plot of land. So like where I am right now, this is my plot of land. I live on this land. My house is on this land. The things I love are on this land, and it's mine, and it's safe. It's safe. Number one, it's safe. So you invited me to be here today. I have invited you onto my plot of land because I want to have this discussion with you, right? However, if I didn't have a great relationship with you, I could have chosen differently, right? I'd be like, I don't think it's not going to be aligned for me. I'm not inviting them onto my plot of land today. That's essentially what we're doing all day long. It can be with people, right? It can be with environments. As we're walking around with our plot of land, do we want to go over here, right? And let our house sit here for a little while today? Do we want to go over here? Maybe we just want to stay right where we're comfortable, right where we know it's safe. That's a really good way to start. Now, I know what you're going to ask next, but if you're at the hospital, if you're at work, we can't always control who comes on to our plot of land. So sometimes when we have to invite people in, the other thing is they all have their own plot of land. So think about a patient. They probably didn't really ever want us on their plot of land, but yet we're in there every hour, every half hour, whatever it is, for that particular patient. We're constantly invading their plot of land. So again, it comes back to choice for our patient. We can give them a choice. Whenever you can give your patient a choice, give them a choice, because that lets them set the boundary for themselves in circumstances where they may not be able to. You can also get strategic about your day. Wherever you have a choice in how you schedule something at work, make the choice that feels best for you, that protects your boundaries, right? Protects your plot of land. These can be simple things. If you know you need to listen to certain music while you're driving into work, listen to that certain music. Anywhere you get a choice, choose what's best for you. That way, where you don't get as many choices, it's a little bit easier. You can regulate yourself a little bit better because you listen to the music that's empowering, right, on your way to work. Or you popped your AirPod in and went and listened to it on the mini break that you got. There's different ways we can be strategic to like maintain our plot of land. Mm-hmm.
And
Really good.
yeah,
Really
and
good example. Yeah.
just to add on to that is we were talking about triggers and how they manifest in their physical reality literally from the past, right? So what is time in that case? And let's just say you're experiencing like that. So I feel like with healing, there's no endedness. Just like you mentioned, it could come back. There's always more to heal, or there's always more to work on. So just notice, you were talking about the breath. Just notice when your breath becomes rigid or tense, or you start breathing shallow, and just, okay, because our mind is releasing so many thoughts. It's so hard to pick up on, like, hey, was that a positive thought, or did I just disempower myself? But if you look into your body, into your breath, you could be like, wow, I'm rigid, I'm tense. Let's take a moment here to analyze the situation. Am I triggered by this patient, or am I triggered by something that I didn't give myself in that interaction, whatever it is? And then you can start troubleshooting that awareness to see where you're like leaking your energy in a sense.
Yes.
And Nicole, how does the quantum field and physics and epigenetics come into the healing process of all this?
Yes. So this is the part that's really fascinating that I think most people in the healthcare world, would be most intrigued by. But literally, I mean, there's scientific evidence to back this up, but we are literally made out of like the dust and gases of the cosmos. There have been researchers, scientists that have studied that and then studied our makeup. So our bodies, our human bodies, really function at that atom level, right? Like we have cells, our body's made up of atoms. The stars are made up of like nebula and other, we get back to that like center root, right? That we're really made of. However, we really are made out of the cosmos, which I know sounds really woo on a big level. And it's also been proven to be true at this point. So when we think about it, we have our physical body. This is how I like to describe it. We also have like this subtle energetic body that goes so many feet, usually about 4 to 5 feet out around your body. Okay. They've been able to pick up, we've seen this in scans. You know what I mean? They picked up on it in science too. So I can send you even links if you all want to some of these articles for the listeners. But we can pick up on this light. It's basically light that emanates from our bodies. Okay. So the DNA strands also are made up of these different types of energy. Okay. And they've looked at the different DNA strands under, the microscopes, and they've been able to go in and actually pick up epigenetically, like where, when we think of how things are expressed phenotypically, versus genotypically, they've been able to go in and kind of pinpoint along the strand, like where different types of traumas would have come from either the mother line or the father line. Okay. Yeah. So it's really very fascinating. It gets a lot more complicated. So I'm trying to keep it at a level where everyone will understand it. That's why I think the articles are important, because some people like to do deep dives into this information, and get really, really technical. What I love is that with these studies, none of us are here by mistake, right? Like we're all very intentionally here. We're all made of the same material in one way or another. So we're all very, very connected to each other. Yes, we're definitely connected to our family line, but we're also very connected to each other. So when we can really get to that understanding that we're all truly connected in some way, I mean, all of our hearts resonate at the same frequency. That's been studied and mapped in science too. And it's the same frequency as the earth, as the planet that we live on. I mean, that's not by mistake, right? That life resonates, our heartbeat resonates at the same energetic field, right, as everyone else around us. However, when we can really comprehend that and integrate it into our way of being on a daily basis, how does that start to change the way we treat ourselves and then the way we treat each other? how do we really grow in compassion, right? And understanding and really wanting to witness each other, it really starts to flip that dynamic a little bit. And so that's where like the science of how we're created, the science, the inside of our being, the essence that exudes on the outside of our being is also just overlapping and interlapping with everyone else that's made just like us on a daily basis. So what does it take, for us to really start to comprehend ourselves that way and the people around us that way?
Because it's like a crazy concept, because you have to grow as like a collective, but the only way you could grow as a collective is if each part of that collective grows on its own as well, because then it translates to the whole thing. It's like a crazy but beautiful concept at the same time.
One thing that stood out to me is the whole notion of racism. It does exist. It does exist in our system because we as a collective have instilled that. We have created those barriers, those lines from a logical standpoint. So the only way to eliminate them is kind of go back to understanding these concepts and shift as a collective to be like, hey, this really doesn't exist, only if we, implement it from an ego standpoint, if that makes sense. So
yeah, but the thing is, like, you can't forget about it, because I understand, because like, it's interesting because people want to eliminate a lot of stuff from history, but then I feel like if we eliminate stuff from history and we don't talk about it, then the future has a chance of repeating those same issues, because 100%. It's more of like you have to acknowledge that it happened. It's like trauma, but that's like trauma on, like, how you mentioned individual trauma from our childhood. This is like the grand scale human trauma that our ancestors did to the world. Like racism was never a good thing, but guess what? Our ancestors messed up, and that's like the trauma of the world, and that we gotta understand that it happened. But now we gotta change the way we look at it. We can't forget that that doesn't exist, because it's always gonna be, like you mentioned, like trauma is always gonna be there. Your trauma is always gonna be there. It's your responsibility to acknowledge that trauma is there, and it's your responsibility to not react to it in a negative way.
Right. That's the difference between it's okay to understand. You could have a memory of things, right? You cannot eliminate memory, but if the memory is creating a trigger, which in our scenario here would be racism, then that's the issue, because the trigger is causing an old memory that could be your experience or the collective consciousness or ancestral trauma, like we talked about, that keeps on looping this what do you want to call it, negativity or this old way of thinking.
Yeah, it's crazy how that works. Like, like the world has its traumas and you have your own trauma, and the thing is, not like you said, not to forget about trauma, but figure out a good and positive way to act afterward, to react to it. Because if your reaction is always bad or it's always the same, then you're never going to get rid of that trauma or that racism or that political issue, right?
Yeah. Well, and just to tie back in, as you were saying that, like, what we're talking about here is huge. Like, it's so big, because when you think about our DNA, like when you think about slavery, when you think about racism, those events actually like mutated at the DNA level. That trauma experience mutated the DNA, whichever side you were on in your thought process, you know what I mean? And the beliefs that you were going to have. And so what we're actually saying is that we want to transform our DNA, right? Moving forward. So it doesn't happen overnight, right? It happens piece by piece, conversation by conversation. So it's just an interesting way to add the science back into it as well.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to how you said that we're all just light, we have the full rainbow, and there's no such thing as darkness or evil. It's just the absence of light. So in these cases, we're still beautiful humans lighting up, or we're just diminishing our light in specific aspects. We just need to open that up to ourselves to enjoy life for what it really is.
Yes. And that's why I always say, like, it all starts within us. The greatest impact we can have on the rest of the world is by working on ourselves first, because we all have our shadow sides, right? That we try to reconcile with, or we try to heal or deal with. But every time we do that and we grow in our awareness and our consciousness, then we're actually role modeling that for someone else around us, or it gives us a new story to share. And each of those things have a ripple effect out into our world, and we need so many ripples right now in the right direction.
Yeah 100%. Yeah, it goes back to the light bulb example that you said. You can have one light bulb that's like, if I'm shining bright, if I got myself figured out, it's good. But guess what? If Matt has this stuff figured out too, that's 2 light bulbs. So the room's already going to be brighter just based off those 2 light bulbs. Then you bring a 3rd light bulb, 4th light bulb, and it's crazy how like back to where you have to grow as a human to have the human collective all grow together, and it's just where that strength comes from.
Yes. Oh, I agree. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Then Nicole, anything you're working on right now? Anything new that you're pursuing?
Yes. So I am actually digging more deeply into the ancestral trauma. So I have a new program starting in January called Your Quantum Lineage Revealed, where we will look at both the practical and the mystical aspects of our lineage. So we'll be looking at the genealogy in a very practical sense, you know, like through ancestry.com, but then we'll also be dealing with the shadow sides of ourselves. And I'll be guiding everyone into tapping into their ancestors and where the shadow comes from so they can start to heal it and transform it over the 8 weeks that we'll be working together.
Oh, super cool. I did my ancestry.com like a few years ago, and majority
Mm-hmm.
of my ancestry is just located in Eastern Europe. Like there's like all of it's there, and there's one in like Argentina or Brazil, and then one in like Britain. But everything else was like in Eastern Europe. So I'm curious, being
Yes.
Eastern European, how did those ancestors potentially affect me?
And so any experience they had that was captured in their DNA. So typically those can be good experiences too. I know sometimes we get caught up in the trauma and we don't talk about actually like a really exciting experience, like the love of adventure. You know what I mean? Or like going and traveling to a new place, maybe starting a business, like something that was really positive, that can be captured in the DNA. And you could bring that into this lifetime. You know what I mean? As well as the trauma and things that maybe were never overcome. Your DNA can be programmed that way. It's important to point out what's been shown in the scientific realm is that up to 50 generations behind us can come in on our DNA. That's a lot. That's a lot of generations when we start thinking about that. So you could have been influenced in really positive ways. And then you could also like bring in some of their past experiences. What I tend to find when I work with clients is we'll work with like either the mother line or the father line. We'll work with them separately. We can work with both, but we'll tend to be drawn to like one or the other. And so it's really interesting because you can know in the practical sense, like, these were all the generations behind me. I like to you can go up to like 7 back and really have a good impact. You don't have to go through all 50 by any means. But what I'll find is that, like, let's say they just have like this nagging sense of, I'm not good enough, like, I'm not valued, or you know what I mean? Like, nothing I do is ever right. Somebody most of the people I work with, they have like something like that. And it usually has to deal with not feeling loved or a great sadness, if we just had to boil it down to like 1 or 2 emotions. And so what we'll do is we'll like work energetically with that line and go back and say, okay, so where does this originate? This sense of not being worthy or not being loved, like, where does it originate? And then I'll take them through guided processes so we can see like what happened. What's the story? What do you need to know so that you can produce a level of healing here now? And what's cool is when you shift the energy that way, I mean, it heals. Like if we went back to the 7th generation, we could bring that forward through all the generations to you now, but then the energy of it carries on 7 generations beyond you. So when we do this work, it has great impact beyond just our time and our, here on the planet.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
mm-hmm.
That's
Intense.
exciting. I recommend the book. It's called
Yes.
It Didn't Start Within. It's something I started reading, and it talks about that family consciousness and how it just gets trickled down to our current events and how we can heal that and the
Yes.
lineage.
Yes. I really feel like that's where we're going now in the world. It really is going to be people like us, and other people listening that feel this way, like doing that deeper work and really looking at these family lines to do the deeper healing that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we as a collective are shifting away from just the physical part of healing like we do in Western society. And I think there's like a nice mix between Eastern and Western medicine on top of everything else to really facilitate real healing.
Yes, I agree. I just feel like we're on the cusp of this new way.
And Nicole, if you were to disappear from this planet, if you were to share one more last piece of advice with anybody, what would it be and why?
I would say really choose who you're being every day, because our being informs our doing. And we live in a world where it's all about, what are you doing? What are you checking off your list? But when you get really aligned to who you want to be and you allow your doing to flow from your being, you'll never feel like you wasted a moment here on the planet.
Wow. Wise words right there. It's really good.
Come from being.
And Nicole, one last thing, where can people find you if they want more information?
Yeah, so you can find me on my website, NicoleGarritano.com. I have a podcast called The Woo is True, so you can find me there, where I talk about all these types of topics and some other things. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
Awesome, Nicole. Thank you so much for your time. You are a wealth of knowledge. Appreciate you getting onto the show and sharing your perspectives about, healing, epigenetics, getting past trauma, and you are doing some amazing work. So I hope everything goes well with the workshop, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you so much. I always love hanging out with both of you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show and want to support the podcast,
Please subscribe, leave us a comment, or give us a like on all platforms.
at We Are Frontline Warriors.